Some advice, some last bits of instruction for writing a 15-page paper. This is a research paper with a methodological edge, and that is that we're approaching religion as an orientation, and a data edge. Mind these texts that we have read so that you can present evidence that will inform your reader about African American religious culture. As a research paper with two edges, that makes it more complex. If I simply said, cover the range 1855 to 1872 and tell me something about that time period, you would simply have to input data. But no, we are starting with this methodological edge, and from that edge, looking at our data. And that's a complex paper. I hope to walk you through and clarify a quite simple formula to accomplish this. In your minds, the methodological edge needs to come first because it shapes the research question. That is what methodologies do. They shape the research question for one. And so it comes first. Now, the data is central to the objective of the paper. I want to see that you guys have learned important elements of the historical and narrative process of African American religious culture. The introduction of your paper, therefore, needs to frame the paper in light of these two edges. So you want an introductory paper, introduction to your paper that invites the reader in and lets them know that these two edges are involved in your process. Let me point this point about why methodology comes first. When you all first arrived to this class, there's a very good chance, had we done a survey, that you would have largely stated and defined religion as a set of beliefs. If that was our methodology, then your research paper now would be to collect and report on beliefs. But that is not the methodology we're using. So that those are not the questions I'm asking you to answer with your evidence. We are looking for something else. This brings us to our method. Our method is developed by Charles Long, first African American graduate of the University of Chicago's theology school, and he needed to solve the problem regarding the unsatisfaction he felt as that black student in graduate school, some notion that he would find his data in black churches because he had a very big perspective on religious meaning in the American context. So he needed a method adequate to the task of not being directed by an advisor to go into black churches and tell us what's happening there. But rather, he needed a method that opened him out onto that broad context of the American landscape to consider how was religious meaning being made on this landscape. He solves a problem then. How can we think about religion in a comparative frame that is adequate to the variety of practices and the disparity of positions from which people make meaning regarding the matters of greatest ultimacy? He is seeing in the blues, he's seeing in the sorrow songs, and then the creation of the blues and jazz. He is seeing a people working out through their creative expression new forms of music. And it is through that creativity that the souls of black folk then are being worked out on the American landscape. He needs a method that is that good. Now, I've simplified what this means to us. The other piece to remember with Long is that having grown up in the Jim Crow South, he was put in his place. He was told where to sit on a bus. And all of you guys think about it. If you had a fiery intelligence and you were raised in a world where you were regularly put in a subservient place, he understood being put in his place and needing to make meaning out of that situation, right? If he wanted to go to the movie, there was a back door, there was a balcony. If he wanted a drink of water, there was a dirtier and lesser faucet. He had to make meaning out of that place. So when you see this figure of religious person on the land, we are thinking about then that existential position of a body on the land. Do you see how different this is than going to ask people about their beliefs? I'm asking you to get into the blood and bones and feet and position of a person on the land. And it does not only apply to African Americans. This is the brilliance of his insight. This is, for me, the best way of understanding anybody who is making meaning out there. Now, here's religious person, and right, I've tried to make it an androgynous figure, a little bit easier to do the breast thing than other parts, but anyway, thinking about that person, this basic truism that it happens in geometry, it happens in geography, it happens if you've got a GIS unit. It requires three positions. One requires three positions in order to determine where one is standing. And the three most important questions that we will find: where do I come from? The question of origins. What do we do while we are here? What are the ethics, morality, and devotion? And what is the significance of my death, with the cliff of mortality always pushing in on human vulnerability? And that this body is moving in through two kinds of time all the time. At a cosmological scale, where is creation and where is the future of a soul, as well as the annual cycles, this is still cosmological, of sun, seasons. These are the big sweeping time frames. And then you have the person's life time frame, their birth, their puberty, their marriage, their death. Those key landmarks that when one crosses, the community will ritualize that crossing event. Or not. And that becomes a problem. So there is religious person on the land, and now we're in African American religious culture. Since our method solves a problem, start your paper with a problem that our method will help to solve, or upon which our method will shine a light. In all likelihood, the best sentence you can write as your hook into the paper might be a question that describes a problem that you're going to solve, or at least for which you are contributing information and analysis in a helpful way. So examples of this kind of question that could hook your reader in might include: how does one make sense of the practice of voodoo in 21st century African American culture in the U.S.? Now that's an intriguing question. For those of us now versed in PIN, we've got a real sense of that. But perhaps when you first saw voodoo, you're thinking to yourself, what is this juju mama stuff? So now one can make sense of the practice of voodoo in 21st century African American culture, because we've got a method that will bring us into the question of origin, why the revivification of an African root makes sense in the 21st century. Where did I come from? Another: why has hip-hop turned to religion? And how can we understand the temple of hip-hop and the Bible of hip-hop? That's a pretty good question. Before you hit this class, did you have that question? Did you know there was a temple of hip-hop? Did you know there was a Bible? What does it mean that in that world of hip-hop, questions of gathering, of creating a temple, of a sacred place, of a life connected to divine creative power, of a guidebook, the Bible, that gives you that daily ethical, moral relationship to the divine? All right, how did Christianity remain an important orienting force in the life of African Americans, given the use of Christianity? Oh, don't you hate that? I mean, I've even got that there. By slaveholders, given the use of Christianity by slaveholders to justify their practices and enforce humility and passivity. That's a good question. How did it become important when we think about Chiro's remarkable gathering of the fragile cultural memories that she manages to pull together in that exhaustive study of slave religion? How was it that Christianity was, in fact, being adopted and used? Why wasn't it rejected? Why did Equiano write in a double narrative? Remember the trope of the talking book, looking back at himself as a naive young man, now in the voice of the genius writer who's recounting that time, and by so doing, he's writing himself into full subjectivity as a speaking, writing, thinking person? Why did Equiano write in a double narrative? And Du Bois wrote about double consciousness. When I read that, I was kind of thinking, is there an echo going on here? What's going on? So, what happens to subjectivity in a racist and sexist context? Does that experience itself create doubleness? Is doubleness part now of the question of existence on the landscape? And why does double consciousness relate to religious salvation, right? Equiano was just driven zealously looking for that sense of a salvation that would arrive for him. So why does double consciousness relate to religious salvation or souls? What is W. Du Bois doing, calling in his book The Souls of Black Folk? That is, this question of doubleness is put by both of these authors into the register of a religious journey.